So here's what went down on SportsCenter earlier today, and I think it's something that really caught my attention. The conversation turned toward the Brooklyn Nets and how their roster situation is playing out right now. And honestly, when you start to look at it from the Lakers' perspective, it's fascinating. On the show, the hosts made it clear, Brooklyn is a team to keep an eye on, not just because of their own moves, but because of how their situation could directly benefit the Lakers. Think about it. This is a franchise that's been taking on contracts left and right, stacking assets, loading up with players that may or may not even be part of their long-term plan. And what happens when you do that? Eventually, you hit a breaking point where you've simply got too many guys. That's exactly where the Nets are right now. They've been carrying this oversized roster, and it's obvious they're going to have to start shedding players. Buyouts, waivers, training camp cuts, it's all coming. And when that happens, other teams around the league, especially ones like the Lakers, need to be ready to pounce. On SportsCenter, they made the case that the Lakers shouldn't just see the Nets as a potential trade facilitator, like that third team to help balance out a bigger deal, but also as a direct source of talent. Brooklyn has several intriguing young players, guys who may not fit in their rotation, but could absolutely contribute in Los Angeles. Names like Zaire Williams, Day'Ron Sharpe, and even Haywood Highsmith were thrown around as examples of players who might become available. All of them bring youth, energy, and upside, which is exactly what the Lakers need when you think about building depth around their stars. But then, the big headline dropped. Brooklyn officially cut ties with Keon Johnson. And this is where things get really interesting. The panel pointed out that Johnson is the type of player who checks a lot of boxes for the Lakers. We're talking about a 6.5 guard with an insane 6'8" wingspan, and, let's not forget, the single highest vertical ever recorded at the NBA Combine, 48 inches. That's unheard of. To put it into perspective, someone like Aaron Gordon, who's considered one of the most explosive dunkers in the league, has a 41-inch vertical. Keon clears that by 7 inches. That's crazy athleticism, and it makes him an absolute lob threat every time he steps on the floor. Now, the reality is the Lakers wouldn't be able to just sign him straight to the main roster right away. He's past the eligibility for a two-way deal, so the most likely scenario would be something like an Exhibit 10 contract. Bring him into training camp, stash him with the G League affiliate, and see if you can develop him. And that's exactly the direction the Lakers have been signaling over the past couple of off-seasons. They want to be seen as a development hub, a team that doesn't just rely on veterans, but also creates a steady cycle of young players working their way up. On the program, they emphasized how crucial that is under the new CBA. Teams can't just buy their way out of roster holes anymore. You've got to find diamonds in the rough, players who might have been overlooked but could turn into legitimate rotation pieces. Sure, you'll miss on a few, that's inevitable, but you only need one or two to hit big, and suddenly you've got a game changer on a minimum contract. Keon Johnson, at just 23 years old, feels like exactly the kind of flyer the Lakers should be taking. He's young, he's explosive, and he fits into that vision of building a sustainable roster while still chasing championships. So the way they framed it on SportsCenter was simple. The Nets roster crunch could end up being the Lakers' opportunity. Whether it's through a trade or by picking up a talented player who slips through the cracks, this is a situation worth monitoring closely. And Keon Johnson's name? Don't be surprised if it comes up again in connection with Los Angeles. And then the conversation on SportsCenter dug even deeper into what Keon Johnson could actually bring to a team like the Lakers. And I'll be honest, this is the part that really grabbed my attention. They acknowledged the obvious. His three-point shooting at the NBA level hasn't been spectacular so far, sitting around 31%. But then they pointed out something important. When you look at his G League numbers, on over 5 attempts per game, he was knocking down around 37% from deep. That's a pretty big difference, and it tells you there's at least a foundation there. It's not about him suddenly turning into a 45% sniper, but when a young guy shows that kind of growth in the right environment, you can't ignore it. And the panel made a great point. Context matters. Think about the teams he's played on: Portland, Brooklyn, situations where the spacing wasn't always great, where he wasn't exactly surrounded by elite playmakers. It's a whole different ballgame when you're running next to guys like LeBron James, Austin Reaves, or even Luka Doncic, players who live to create easy shots for their teammate. Imagine Keon catching the ball right in his shooting pocket every time, getting higher quality looks instead of forcing tough ones. Suddenly, that 31% doesn't look like a ceiling. It looks like a number that could climb with the right teammates and system. What SportsCenter stressed was how a team like the Lakers could play this smart. They don't need to rush him onto the main roster right now. Bring him in on an Exhibit 10 deal, let him compete in training camp, and if he doesn't crack the immediate rotation, you've still got his rights in the G League. That's the way most of these camp contracts work anyway. Guys get waived, slide to the affiliate team, and the organization still gets a chance to develop them. And in Keon's case, the upside is clear: defense and athleticism. Those two things the Lakers desperately need, and he already brings them at an NBA level. On the show, they even talked about how that cycle of development has become crucial in today's NBA. You need G League guys who can move up to two-way deals and then eventually graduate to the main roster. It's about farming talent, developing it, and keeping that pipeline flowing. Keon Johnson doesn't fit into the two-way system anymore because of his years of service, but he's exactly the kind of player you don't want slipping away. If he's tearing it up in the G League, you don't want another team swooping in and snatching him. That's when you pull the trigger, sign him to the main roster, and maybe even lock him down to a cheap long-term deal. And here's where it gets interesting. They mentioned that this is the kind of forward thinking the Lakers have to embrace, especially with cap flexibility always being a question mark. If you can secure a guy like Keon Johnson for 2, 3, maybe 4 years on a very team-friendly number, say $2 to $3 million annually, you've not only added a valuable piece, but you've also created a trade chip for the future. If he blossoms, perfect. You've found a high-flying, versatile wing on a discount. If not, his contract is still movable. It's a win-win scenario, but the real excitement from the panel came when they started to imagine what a lineup with Keon Johnson could look like. Pair him with another hyper-athlete like Adu Tiero, throw in someone like an Arthur Kaluma, and suddenly you've got this trio of wings with length, versatility, and explosive athleticism that can defend multiple positions and really change the identity of the Lakers' second unit. Add in the fact that Keon averaged 11 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and about a steal per game last season, plus nearly 3 deflections per 36 minutes. That's the profile of a player who knows how to make his presence felt. And that was the tone on SportsCenter. Keon Johnson isn't just another name floating around after a roster cut. He's a legitimate project with real upside, the kind of guy who might not make headlines today, but in the right system could turn into a piece every contender wishes they had. And as SportsCenter wrapped up the discussion, they really drove home why Keon Johnson is such an intriguing option for a team like the Lakers. The panel didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, his efficiency is still a work in progress. That 31% from 3 on just over 5 attempts per game isn't exactly eye-popping, and his overall shooting percentage of 39% leaves room for improvement. But then, they flipped the perspective. They said, that's exactly why you bring him in as a development piece. He's 23 years old, still figuring out his game, and the raw numbers suggest there's a lot to work with if you put him in the right environment. They broke down his season in detail: 79 games played, 56 starts, nearly 25 minutes a night. He averaged 11 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, plus a steal, and even half a block per game. And here's the kicker. When you adjust to per 36 number, which gives you a sense of what he could look like in a full starter's role, the stat line jumps to about 16 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 steals, and nearly a block per game. Those aren't throwaway numbers. Those are the kind of all-around contributions that fit perfectly on a team looking to build depth and versatility. SportsCenter emphasized something really important. Keon Johnson doesn't need to come in and be a starter. That's not the expectation. What the Lakers need from him is to develop into that reliable rotation piece, a guy who can come off the bench, bring defense, athleticism, and energy, and ideally knock down shots at a respectable clip. If he can settle in around 35% from three, like he showed during that year in Portland, suddenly he's not just a body to fill a roster spot. He becomes a legitimate 3-and-D wing option. And on a roster built around LeBron and Anthony Davis, those players are like gold. And the panel couldn't stop pointing out that athleticism. That 48-inch vertical is not just a flashy combine number. It's something you see when he attacks the rim, when he crashes the glass, when he defends at the point of attack. The Lakers have made it clear they want more length, more speed, more energy to surround their stars. Keon Johnson checks those boxes, even if he's still polishing the offensive side of his game. The conversation wrapped with a broader perspective, too. This is the new NBA under the current CBA. Teams don't always have the luxury of chasing every big-name free agent or throwing huge contracts around. Instead, you need to find those undervalued guys, those developmental players who can grow into rotation contributors. That's how you sustain success without breaking the bank. Keon Johnson, given his age, tools, and flashes of production, represents exactly that kind of opportunity. So the tone on SportsCenter was clear. This is a low-risk, high-reward move the Lakers should at least explore. You're not bringing him in expecting 20 points a night. You're bringing him in to develop, to grow, and potentially become a piece of the rotation that helps extend the championship window. And if he hits, you might look back one day and say, this was one of those under-the-radar moves that actually changed the course of a season. So, on tonight's edition of SportsCenter, one of the big talking points was the situation unfolding with the Miami Heat. And honestly, it caught my attention right away. Tyler Herro, who has been such a central piece of what Miami does offensively, is now expected to miss the beginning of the season. The reason? He had to undergo surgery after suffering an injury during his workouts while he was preparing for the new campaign. And listen, nobody likes to hear that kind of news. You never want to see a player go down like that, especially one who is not only talented, but also one of the engines of his team. And that was something the panel kept stressing on the show. They talked about how, in the NBA, so much of a season is dictated not just by talent, but by health. It's not always the most skilled or the deepest roster that makes it through. It's often the team that manages to stay relatively healthy, especially once the grind of the playoffs arrives. Miami losing Herro, even for the early stretch of the season, changes the equation completely. He was their leading scorer, their primary shot creator, the guy who could initiate the offense and get others involved. Taking him off the floor, even for a few weeks or months, forces the Heat to retool everything on the fly just when they should be setting their identity for the year. The show went deeper into what this could mean. It's not just about how Miami survives until Herro returns, but also how sharp he'll look when he does. Will he jump right back into rhythm, or will it take time to regain his legs, his conditioning, his shooting rhythm? That's a huge unknown, and that uncertainty alone could mean Miami's season gets off to a rocky, uneven start. Now, here's where it ties into the Lakers and why this conversation matters for them. The analysts on SportsCenter raised the point that this situation could indirectly help Los Angeles in their pursuit of Andrew Wiggins. And I know nobody ever likes to link an injury to potential opportunities, but the reality is, teams often reevaluate their rosters and their future based on moments like this. Miami already had question marks heading into this season. Were they good enough to be a top contender in the East? Were they closer to being a playoff lock? Or just another play-in team like last year when they barely made it in as the 8th seed? With Herro sidelined, those doubts grow even louder. And the panel speculated that if Miami gets off to a slow start, there could come a point where the organization decides it's time to shed salary, free up future cap space, and think about retooling for the seasons ahead, rather than pushing all their chips in right now. If that happens, names like Andrew Wiggins could come into play, and that's where the Lakers could benefit. Another detail that was brought up on the show, recent reports have suggested that there hasn't been much traction between the Heat and the Lakers when it comes to talks around Wiggins, but maybe now we understand why. Maybe Miami knew all along that Herro was going to be sidelined and decided to hold on to Wiggins as insurance to cover some of that lost scoring. When you think about it, it makes perfect sense. If you lose your top scorer and playmaker, you don't want to immediately subtract another reliable offensive option from your rotation. So now it becomes a waiting game. SportsCenter highlighted that Los Angeles, instead of rushing into a move, might be better off staying patient and letting the situation unfold. If the Heat stumble, if they find themselves in the back end of the play-in race, or even on the outside looking in, they may eventually have no choice but to consider cutting costs and moving pieces like Wiggins. That's when the Lakers could strike, and that's when they'd likely be in a much stronger position to negotiate a deal that works in their favor. And I have to say, that part of the conversation really resonated with me. Because yes, in a perfect world, you want the Lakers roster set before training camp. You want the group you're going into battle with to already be in place. And then any moves made later are just minor upgrades. But there's also something to be said about patience, about evaluating what you really need once the season gets going. And if that patience puts the Lakers in a position to add a player like Andrew Wiggins without overpaying, then maybe waiting isn't such a bad strategy after all. On SportsCenter tonight, the conversation shifted toward the real question everyone wants answered. How is Andrew Wiggins actually going to perform this season? That's the critical piece in all of this. Because look, if he plays at a high level and thrives with Miami, then yes, it gives the Heat a little bit more leverage. But if he struggles, if he's inconsistent, if he looks more like a piece that doesn't quite fit, then suddenly the price drops. And that could actually scare away potential suitors. The panel even brought up that this might change the Lakers' view as well, because if he's not playing at that top level, LA could start to wonder, is this really the guy we thought he was? Is this the missing piece we've been waiting on? And it's not just about Wiggins himself. The analysts stress that this is also about what happens within the Lakers' own roster. If certain guys step up, maybe role players start producing at a higher clip, maybe a combination of pieces proves to be enough, then the urgency to go get Wiggins decreases. The show highlighted how quickly things can change in this league. 1 month you're desperate for a wing, and 2 months later you might realize that hole isn't nearly as big as it looked. Now, the flip side is interesting too. If Wiggins plays well, some might argue that Miami could drive up the asking price. But SportsCenter made the case that this isn't necessarily true. Because Miami isn't just looking for talent in return, they're looking for cap relief. That's the bigger goal here. They want to clear salary, open up flexibility, and put themselves in position for future moves. So, while a good run of games from Wiggins helps showcase his value, it doesn't necessarily mean Miami suddenly has all the leverage. Unless a desperate team comes along and wildly overpays, his market is going to be capped by the fact that he holds a player option and could walk at the end of the season. That was another point they hammered home. Wiggins has control here. If he doesn't want to go to a certain destination, say a rebuilding team that isn't ready to compete, he can simply play out the year and then leave in free agency. No team wants to give up real assets for a player who might just walk away after a few months. That risk alone shrinks the pool of teams willing to make a strong push for him, and that's what keeps the Lakers firmly in play. They have the right mix of expiring contracts, young pieces, and the type of market that would actually appeal to Wiggins. Is a big stage. They're a contending team, and they can realistically offer him the long-term security he may want if he declines that player option. SportsCenter emphasized that this is exactly why the Lakers don't have to panic or overpay right now. They're in a strong position, no matter how you slice it. The panel also touched on something I thought was really smart. Patience allows the Lakers to truly assess their own need before making a massive commitment. Maybe the glaring hole ends up being on the bench with scoring. Maybe the backup center position becomes more of an issue than expected. If those needs prove bigger than the wing spot, then it wouldn't make sense to throw everything at Wiggins. Waiting gives them the clarity they need, and that's why the analysts pushed back on the idea that the Lakers have to strike immediately. They said it's not about rushing, it's about timing. If Wiggins is the answer, the opportunity will still be there in a few months. And if he's not, the Lakers won't have locked themselves into a move that looked good on paper but didn't actually solve their problems on the floor. And then on SportsCenter, the conversation took a really interesting turn, because the analysts started asking a tough but fair question. Even if Andrew Wiggins is available, is he really the best fit for this Lakers roster as it's built right now? They acknowledged his talent, his ability to put the ball on the floor, create for himself, and get you 20 points on any given night. That's not something you find easily, especially in a player who also defends at a high level. But here's the dilemma. With stars like LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and all the other ball-dominant guys in this lineup, how many opportunities would Wiggins actually have to showcase that part of his game? Would he just end up being another piece standing in the corner, waiting for catch-and-shoot threes, instead of being used to his full potential? They compared that scenario to what's already happening with Rui Hachimura. Rui is an incredibly efficient mid-range scorer, one of the very best in the league statistically, and he shot over 40% from three last season. Yet, most nights he's relegated to spot-up duty because of the offensive structure around him. So the point was, if the Lakers aren't even maximizing Rui, would they really maximize Wiggins? Or would he simply be another expensive asset that doesn't quite fit as well as fans think? That's where the panel opened the door to another possibility. Instead of going all in on Wiggins, maybe the smarter play is to spread those resources across multiple role players. Imagine a scenario where, instead of trading for Wiggins, the Lakers acquire 2 or 3 quality pieces, a defensive specialist on the wing, a reliable backup big, maybe even another scoring guard off the bench. For the cost of one big contract, you could shore up several areas of weakness and give the roster greater depth and flexibility. They floated names like defensive-minded wings and energy guys who wouldn't cost nearly as much as Wiggins, but could fit seamlessly into what the Lakers are trying to build. Now, let me be clear. Nobody on the panel was saying Wiggins wouldn't help. In fact, they agreed he has the kind of two-way skill set that could raise the Lakers' ceiling if everything clicked. But they also stressed that this front office has to weigh the risk of overpaying too soon. Why lock yourself into one massive deal when the market could look completely different by December or January? As the trade deadline approaches, Miami might feel more urgency to move Wiggins, and his price could drop. That's the kind of leverage you want if you're the Lakers, letting time work in your favor instead of rushing in out of desperation. They also circled back to Miami's situation. Without Tyler Herro, there's always the chance that role players step up, that the Heat stay competitive for stretches. But even then, what's their ceiling? Maybe a 6th seed if everything breaks right. More realistically, they're fighting for a spot in the play-in. And if that's the case, does it really make sense for Miami to keep paying heavy money just to stay in the middle of the pack? Probably not. Which is why the panel felt confident that the Heat will eventually look to shed salary. And Wiggins remains their clearest path to do that. So the bottom line on SportsCenter was this: the Lakers don't need to panic, and they don't need to overpay. Wiggins is intriguing, no question, but there are multiple pathways to improving this roster. Maybe he becomes the missing piece, maybe he doesn't. But the key is patience. Let the season play out. Identify what the real needs are, and then act when the timing is right. That's how you build not just a playoff team, but a championship contender. So, let me walk you through what just went down on SportsCenter, because the conversation tonight really caught everybody off guard. We've been following what has already been a wild off-season full of speculation, rumors, and non-stop chatter about the Lakers. And just when it felt like things were finally starting to calm down a bit, an insider came in with a bombshell report that has fans buzzing again. And the name at the center of all of this? None other than Austin Reaves. Now, the report didn't just recycle the same stories we've already heard all summer. This one brought in fresh details that completely changed the tone of the conversation. According to Anthony Irwin, who put this out there, Reaves is expected to pursue a massive new deal when the time comes, something in the ballpark of $30 to $35 million a year. And if that wasn't enough to stir up the fan base, Irwin also mentioned that the San Antonio Spurs are keeping a very close eye on him. So not only are we talking about a significant pay raise, but potentially a scenario where the Lakers could lose one of their most important young pieces to a team that has been slowly and quietly rebuilding for the future. Now, of course, the panel had to put this into context. They made it clear Irwin isn't quite on the level of guys like Shams Charania or Adrian Wojnarowski when it comes to breaking news, but he's still a credible voice around the league. So yes, you take it with a grain of salt, but the number being floated out there? That's nothing to brush off. $35 million per year for Reaves would place him in a tier of players that franchises are essentially building around. And that led to the bigger question. Do the Lakers really see him in that light? We've all seen how far he's come since entering the league. Every season, he's added something new to his game. Last year, he was giving you around 20 points per night, showing flashes of being more than just a role player. But the panel also pointed out the inconsistency that comes with his rise. In certain stretches, particularly after the mid-season shakeup when Luka came into the fold, Reaves looked fantastic, like a guy you couldn't afford to take off the floor. But then, in the playoffs, against a team like the Timberwolves with their length and defensive intensity, he struggled. He was exposed at times, and that raised legitimate questions about whether he's the perfect long-term fit next to Luka, or if the Lakers should think about using him differently. Maybe even as a sixth man who can come in and carry the offense in spurts, rather than having to defend elite players night in and night out. The point is, this report reignited the debate around Austin Reaves. We're not just talking about whether he's a good player, we know that already. We're talking about whether he's worth committing to as a core piece at a number as big as $30 to $35 million annually. And that, especially under the new CBA, where teams are forced to be way more cautious about their spending, is a huge decision for the Lakers. And the conversation didn't stop there, because the panel also highlighted the Spurs' interest. San Antonio is clearly positioning itself for the future, especially with Victor Wembanyama leading the way. Pairing Wemby with a versatile guard like Reaves, who can score, create, and take pressure off a young roster, makes a lot of sense. And the more this was discussed, the more it felt like a real possibility, rather than just a random rumor floating around Twitter. So that was the starting point of the discussion on SportsCenter tonight. And let me tell you, this wasn't just a casual rumor tossed out for fun. This was the kind of update that has Lakers fans nervous and Spurs fans excited, because it opens the door to some very real possibilities about the future of Austin Reaves and the makeup of both of these franchises moving forward. So after laying out that first report about Reaves' contract demands and the Spurs keeping tabs on him, the conversation on SportsCenter really shifted into the bigger picture. And the way it was framed was fascinating, because the panel started asking the real tough question. If LeBron James decides this is his final year in Los Angeles, are the Lakers seriously prepared to commit to Austin Reaves as their second star moving forward? Because, make no mistake, if you're handing a guy $30 to $35 million annually, that's the level of commitment you're making. Now, of course, if Reaves goes out there next season and drops 25 points a night, or even consistently gives you 20 alongside Luka, all while being efficient and durable, then, yeah, you can justify it. But the point the analysts kept hammering was this: Reaves is not a defensive stopper. He's not the kind of player where, if the offense isn't flowing, he still gives you that reliable defensive floor to fall back on. Guys like Marcus Smart, who can average 6 points, 5 points, and still justify his place on the floor because of the elite defense, those are rare. Reaves doesn't fit that mold. He's not a lockdown guy at the point of attack. And so, if he's not scoring, what is he really giving you in terms of game-changing impact? That was the tone of the discussion, and it was a fair one. Then came the Spurs angle. The insiders dug deeper into what this fit might actually look like. Not just in free agency, but potentially even through a trade. Imagine this: San Antonio, with Wembanyama ready to accelerate their timeline, looking for a guard who can score, create, and grow alongside him. Reaves just had a year averaging 25 and 6, while shooting nearly 46% from the field. That's no small production. So, the conversation moved toward how adding Reaves could significantly bolster that Spurs lineup. And then a proposal popped up that made everyone lean in. What if the Lakers decided that instead of committing that massive contract to Reaves, they flipped him to San Antonio for young defensive depth and future assets? The names being tossed around: Jeremy Sochan, Julian Champagny, and a package of draft picks. Now, let's break that down. Sochan is a versatile defender, already playing some minutes at point guard for the Spurs, averaging 11 points and nearly 7 boards last year. He's not on Reaves' level offensively, but he's the kind of high-energy, switchable defender that every contender values. Champagny, while not a star, is another guy who gives you length and defensive effort. Put those two together, and suddenly, the Lakers would have more versatility off the bench. The panel even laid out a potential depth chart. If you move Reaves and slot Marcus Smart into the starting lineup full-time, you're rolling with Luka, Smart, Rui Hachimura, LeBron, and DeAndre Ayton. Off the bench, you'd have guys like Sochan, Champagny, Jared Vanderbilt, Jackson Hayes, and Jake LaRavia. It's a deeper, more defensive-minded roster. The question is that better than just keeping Reaves? And then came the picks. The report suggested 2 first-rounders could be included in the deal, which would give the Lakers even more ammunition down the line. Some of the panel felt 2 picks wasn't enough for Reaves, 3 would make it more realistic, but even then, it sparked a debate. Would San Antonio really part with that much just to get Reaves and then turn around and pay him a max-level contract? Would the Lakers seriously entertain moving on from one of their breakout stars? It was one of those moments where you realize there's no clear right or wrong answer. But the conversation didn't stop there, because while this was being debated, another name kept circling back around: Andrew Wiggins. Reports have been flying left and right about whether or not the Lakers and Heat have been in talks with Golden State about Wiggins. Some insiders insist those discussions are active. Others swear they're not happening at all. Contradicting information everywhere. But what everyone on the show seemed to agree on was this: if the Lakers were somehow able to land Wiggins, that would arguably be their best possible addition given what's realistically available on the market. And here's the kicker: bringing in Wiggins wouldn't require the Lakers to sacrifice Reaves. That's the flip side. You can pursue one without losing the other, and that possibility was painted as the ideal scenario. Still, the uncertainty around Wiggins, the looming contract situation with Reaves, and the Spurs quietly monitoring the situation, all of it combined to create a pretty dramatic picture. And one of the final points made in the segment was this: the Lakers, at least by all accounts, do want to keep Reaves. He's done everything they've asked of him. He's adjusted to every role, whether it was coming off the bench, being a secondary scorer, or even stepping in as a primary option when injuries hit. He's been reliable, he's been adaptable, and he's earned respect in that locker room. But loyalty and sentiment only go so far when you're staring at a $35 million decision under the new CBA. That's the reality, and that's why this report hit so hard tonight. He has steadily raised his production each year, climbing from roughly 7 points per game to 13, then 15, and most recently, 20. The question now is whether he can continue that upward trajectory in the upcoming season. If he does, it could settle the debate entirely. The Lakers would have little reason to consider moving him. Instead, they would likely look to secure his future with an extension and pair him with Luka for the long term. However, if the year begins with inconsistency and he struggles leading up to the trade deadline, the front office might revisit trade scenarios. That uncertainty is exactly what gives this report added intrigue. The situation will be worth monitoring closely, and it raises the question: should the Lakers stay patient with Reaves or explore a move while his value remains high?